before the meeting started, I formally received a petition from the Union Labour Party on behalf of the CCG. That was, I haven't read it yet, but because I had to come straight to my Cambridgeshire meeting, but I believe it was about publishing information related to the Older People's Programme. Right, questions from the public? Right. Who shall I take first? This is a great deal of power. Daniel, I'll take you first.
Thank you, Chair. Dennis Eichner, Cambridge Labour Parliamentary Candidate. Two questions. First on the Older People's Services. And firstly, thank you for your belated publication of the pre-qualification questionnaire. I think we're all waiting with bated breath to see what questions you asked that Serco could possibly pass. So we'll look at that with interest. But my question is, I recently contacted all the GP practices in Cambridge to ask them about this process, about how they felt about it, and about how involved they felt about it. You won't be surprised there was quite polarised opinions, some strongly in favour, say more strongly against what's going on. But the striking thing was almost all of them said they didn't feel very involved in the process, and they didn't feel they had the time or the resources to be meaningfully involved in the process. And so I suppose my question to you is, what do you plan to do to address this when you're going forward with such an important change and you don't seem to actually have the support of many of your general practice colleagues? My second question relates to the 111 out-of-hours service. I've had people say to me that there are some concerns now about the future of the out-of-hours service. I wonder if you could tell me when it's next going to be tendered and what the implications are, in your view, of the decision to award the 111 contract to another provider. What are the implications for the current out-of-hours service? Thank you.
I'm going to, because there's so many of you, I'm going to take batches of 4 and then we'll answer them in batches of 4. That's right. Who's next? I see you.
Hello, Steve Sweeney, GMB. I'll try and be as brief and concise as I can on this. Obviously our concern is around the older people's programme. We're getting near to the deadline for shortlisting and the such like, and we've come quite far down the procurement process, but my concern is that there's still far more questions than we've been given answers to. We note obviously the organisations that have made it through the process so far, the successful bidders. Again, and I've said this in meetings before, how some of these organisations managed to get through this process absolutely beggars belief. Just to note very, very quickly that JP Morgan have today been fined $1.7 billion for their involvement in the Madoff affair. For those of you that have done your research on some of the organisations that are past the process, you'll know why that statement is relevant. I still feel that there are still some answers to questions that were asked a few meetings ago. One particular question was around where the burden of financial responsibility falls should the successful bidder run into difficulties, whether that falls, and if it's a private sector organisation, whether they bear the brunt of that, or, as we suspect, it will be, again, the public sector and public money that is used to bail out that particular organisation. That question still hasn't been answered yet, and also just in terms of the nature of the contract. And look, we're very much we want to be consulted. We've heard a lot about openness and transparency. Documentation is still being withheld from us, and commercial confidentiality is being put above the public and put above the community. The NHS belongs to us, and we don't believe that should be. We believe the overriding principle should be to be open and transparent. Would the CCG consider conducting a referendum on the proposal for the Older People's Programme, or a ballot, and respecting the outcome of that to give people real choice in what's actually happening rather than having that taken away? Just at the last meeting I mentioned staffing levels and whether there was a staffing crisis across the CCG. I'm not sure that was addressed adequately at the last meeting. We were told that if there are staff shortages, that beds are closed, which obviously is a detriment to the service. But many of the stories, the stories that we've heard today, and also within the documentation and the CQC reports cite staffing issues. And again, this is a concern because this isn't typically the area that would necessarily suffer with recruitment and retention, and what's being done to address those particular issues, and is it an issue of funding?
Thank you. The guy in the blue t-shirt in the back, I'm sure I should know your name by now.
Phil.
Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Phil Ward from Peterborough NHS Public. Is it on? I just noticed something now. We just had about 2 guys just ask some really difficult questions. Surely you should be answering those questions first before you take a note. Another 2 questions from other people. They've just asked. Daniel's just asked 3 questions. Steve made at least a few points. You should be asking those questions first, rather than diluting all our questions, complex questions, so you can get it over with. So you can get it over with as quickly as possible. So you should have answered Daniel's questions first, because otherwise, how are you going to remember what questions have been asked? That's my first point, which I've just thought up. Okay. My other 2 points are. When you do the minutes at the beginning of the meeting, you say, are the minutes okay from the last meeting? Why are we, the members of the public, not allowed to comment on whether the minutes are okay? Okay, that's not democracy. That just illustrates the lack of democracy in these meetings. Okay? And the other point is, I've noticed there's one of your board here called Richard Withers, who's not here, I don't think, are you, Richard? No. So what's happened to him? I mean, at the beginning of this meeting, you did the apologies. Did you? There was no apologies for any of your people being missing. So where is he? And why is he not here? Is it because he's had enough of these meetings because he doesn't agree with them? So one of your GPs maybe doesn't agree with what's going on. So anyway, I think you've got about 8 questions from the 3 of us. I suggest you answer those questions first before you get another one in the audience to ask another question. So you don't dilute all our complex questions and give us very boring answers that don't just matter of fact. Okay, because we've all asked very, very good questions so far. So why don't surely you should just take 1 question at a time, or 1 person's questions at a time, so that we have more of a democracy here. Yeah. Okay, I've made my point.
I said I would take questions 4 at a time, and I'm not going to take various.
Yeah, but that's ridiculous. That's not democracy. Even on these panel shows, they take a maximum of 3 questions at a time on television, and you're diluting the whole process. I wonder why that is.
I've made a list of all the questions, and I know that.
Yeah, but you can't. I hope you give us proper answers, because the questions we've answered, a lot of which have been answered before, they deserve proper answers rather than a politician's answers, okay?
They will get proper factual answers.
Okay, well, surely we've asked you enough questions already, so surely you should honour our questions.
Said I would take 4 at a time.
By giving us
I'm
proper
going to
answers.
ask Mary to come in.
I've made my points. Thank you.
Thank you.
Rebecca Stevens. Rebecca Stevens and the Mary Cook Peterborough Pensioners Association, also a retired nurse. Rebecca Stevens, with the patient reference group and the item of hot topic item. What you did fail to mention in that hot topic was that the PRG was concerned that there had been no formal feedback on the outcomes of the consultation process approach and how you should learn lessons about that. And I think we as a public would absolutely agree with that. I just wanted to bring that because also Mr. Harper Brown actually brought in consultation when he was mentioning procurement. So I think that's more important than ever. I also think that those people supposedly representing, and you've mentioned one person today on this patient representation board group, those people perhaps are given a little bit too much power in the fact that, I tell you straight, they don't represent me, and I've been to some of these meetings, and I don't think they represent others that are there either. I have listened to what people have said, and I'm telling you straight, they are not representing what the thoughts are at a lot of those meetings. You might take that in hand. Now, we're talking here about funding, and we have Mr. Libby, who tells us there's with a fair wind, with a fair wind, and if we go on the way we are, we will balance financially before long. We have the chair worried to death about the situation to do with funding. I'm reading through the papers, and so is everybody else worried about funding. Can I ask the chair, is there a great deal of money spent here on consultants? Because it begins to worry me when I hear differing opinions on the funds that you have. But I'll just tell you this, evidence-based commissioning, and we've got Dr. Lyman brought this one up. Now, evidence-based commissioning, right, and here we have, and this is the plan ahead, and you're talking about a bad throat over there, mine is nearly killing me, but I'm determined to face you people up, I'll tell you. Here we have COBIC, C-O-B-I-C, please take note of that, the public. COBIC, outcome-based, incentivised contracts. And you're looking for evidence-based commissioning. Need you look much further than the Staffordshire Hospital when they did the Liverpool Care Plan and used incentivised contracts and incentivised payments. There's your evidence-based commissioning, and here you are going full steam ahead with this COBIC, C-O-B-I-C. We then go on to the funding also, and now you're calling it better, you changed the name, Better Care Funding, or the Integration Transformation Fund, as you would know it as before. But it's now called Better Care Funding. Right, and here we have, we're told 47 million is coming from the government out of that 3.8 billion that they're supposed to be giving you towards that fund, and half of that's going to go to the council. I have to tell you this in all seriousness. The we pensioners are aware of the cap that is coming our way. The cap on care funding, which works out at £72,000 that we're told would be the cost of it without hotel bills on top. So you're looking at £150,000 is what we are expecting to be the cap on that. And I warn all doctors here and all commissioners that no way are the older people coming up with this money when you are paying for consultants that are not even giving you the information that you require.
Right, we attempt to answer those 4 sets of questions as factually as we can. I will deal with those questions, and then Andy will come in to deal with all the others, and I will keep a note. I do keep a note of all the questions asked, as does Andy, as does our secretary. The minutes, by the way, it's always open to people. The minutes are published well in advance of the meeting. If you find there are any factual inaccuracies, then we're very happy to receive a formal notification of that and to amend them accordingly.
Excuse me, no, I asked the question, of that question. I don't see those. Number one, there's not enough agendas to hand around, so I have to keep looking at other people's agendas.
They're on our website and they're published.
Yeah, but no, we should be able to comment in the meeting. That's democracy.
We meet in public. It's not a public meeting. I'm sorry.
No, people should.
All I can say is that we have in the past within this and previous organisations accepted a formal amendment to the minute when it was notified to us. It was a factual accuracy one. And we are always prepared to do that.
Yes, but surely we should have an
amendment. Can I say that Richard, his apologies were noted at the beginning of the meeting. In fact, there were several people who were not here. Richard is ill today. He's on holiday. His wife is ill. And that was noted at the beginning of the meeting. So I'm afraid Richard is still very much part of our team, which we're very pleased about.
I still
Andy, sorry. Andy, can I ask you to take any other questions?
Yeah. No, excuse me, I just think I would just like it for the record, put into the minutes, that, and I want, if I come to the next
Could I ask, to make sure we get it right, I would rather you put it in writing to our secretary, and then we would...
No, I'm not a well person, so I can't always write these things, so I can't write a lot of things, yeah? So if anyone in the public agrees with me, you can speak up now, but I think we should be allowed in the meetings, the minutes, because who sets the rules for your meetings? The government does, as you've told me before, Chairwoman.
Yes, I have.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, we are a meeting in public, not a public meeting.
The least you can
we
give
will
us...
accept factual amendments to the minutes.
Yes, well, I strongly disagree with that.
I suggest...
And I'm sure other people here too.
You are not in a position to be able to amend our minutes at the floor of the meeting and at the meeting because
why not?
you don't have the right to speak.
Give me a good
Now,
reason
can
why.
I suggest
Give me a good reason why. That's logical.
May I suggest that you start answering Daniel's questions?
So Danny, thanks for your two questions. I'll
not democratic.
answer them in the order you gave them. So you referred first of all to survey of GP practices around the Old People's Programme. I guess to be honest, I'm not surprised to hear that there's a variety of feedback around that. We're a very big CCG. We have 108 practices, something like 870 GPs, but what you have here is the elected leadership of those GP practices. And you'll know that the way that we're constituted is we have 8 local groups, and each of the leadership teams of those 8 local groups that sit beneath this governing body are elected by all the practices, by all GPs in fact. And as an aside, that process of election is just about to launch again as part of our kind of cycle, as you may know. Notwithstanding, we do a huge amount, as you'd expect, around engagement with practices. Neil has a regular newsletter which covers our Old People Programme all the ways and in detail. We have all practice member events every quarter or so, which are very well attended. And of course, key topics like the Older People's Programme more widely is discussed at all of our local commissioning groups. Arnold, our clinical lead, I know, spends a great deal of time out about talking with practice and with GPs, but I would fully accept your point that engagement varies and understanding of what we're doing varies, but can assure you that we do work and will continue to work really hard on engagement. On your question about 111 and out of hours, I think your question about kind of the timetabling. So what I can tell you is the predecessor organisations to the CCG, the two main PCTs, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, when they agreed their plans for launching 111, as was national guidance at the time, was that they would introduce as a pilot 111 and then move to a procurement with a new service kicking off in April 15. Now, that was the PCT's decision, predecessor PCT's decision, and this governing body will be reviewing that over the coming weeks, and we'll of course bring that back to our public meeting when we've had some chance to think through some of the changes to 111 and some of the changes in government policy around urgent care more widely. But that was the minuted decision of the PCT's. Going back quite a few months. If I can turn to Steve's questions. Steve, I think there were 3 main questions, but correct me, forgive me if I miss any. You asked a question about what happens if an organisation runs into difficulty if we were to place a contract. In essence, what any contract we enter into would be here is a payment schedule and here's a service stroke outcome schedule, and that's true across the NHS and the independent sector, and that's a legally binding contract, and the only way for an NHS or an independent body to exit such a contract would be to give notice, and in most of our contracts there's some kind of, indeed most standard contracts, there will be some clauses about implications of exiting any contracts. So the liability doesn't rest, so if for example a provider ran into financial difficulties and needed to exit, the liability for those provider costs would not rest with the CCG, although of course the CCG would need to be in a position then to bring in alternative provision, and that's something we will look at across all of our contract areas. I think you asked a specific question on referendum, because I think the word you used. As you'll be aware, that's not the way decision-making for CCGs is constituted. It's very clear in our constitution that this is the legal entity, the legal decision-making body. Now, of course, as we've been discussing today, and I hope that you'll welcome the paper we took earlier on about publishing more information. Now we're at a key stage in the procurement, of course, as part of our decision, we're always looking at what are the views of patients and carers. And there's a great deal of work, as you know, going on around how do we measure that in the procurement and in the outcomes that we're taking forward. I think your final question is around staff shortages, so that goes obviously beyond the CCG, which is a very small organisation, into the providers. I mean, I'm sure it is definitely the case that there are pinch points in some areas, and some of our providers is well known. Jill Houghton, nurse member on this board, does a great job through quality reviews. So what we do as a commissioning body is we're continually holding quality reviews of our providers, where we look at things like staffing. And Jill mentioned the Francis review earlier on, and one of the things we'll particularly be looking at coming out of Francis is nurse staffing levels, and we have some work underway on that. Turning, Mary, to a couple of your points. You mentioned COBIC, COBIC. They're a very small, we have a small contract with COBIC to support us on the Older People's Programme. What they are is they're a specialist consultancy. There's a number of doctors involved, and their area of expertise is helping commissioners to construct outcome-based specifications, which you'll know from our procurement, that's precisely what we're doing. So we do have a small contract with COBIC. On your second point, where I think we've been open around funding and now known as the Better Care Fund, this is you're right, it's not a CCG initiative, it's a government initiative that was announced in the spending review in the summer. I think it'd be fair to say that the governing body, although we kind of welcome the principle, are very concerned about how we are going to free up the funding, because this is not new money, the funding that we will be required to put into the fund. Because although we're keen to progress joint initiatives, to release that funding means we're not spending that money in other services. And we have some time to work through that, but that is going to be a really big challenge for the CCG, and I think we've been open about that.
Right, I'll take the next batch of questions. Going to take the young man beside between John and Daniel, then the lady to the left, then our guy with the camera at the back, and in fact, again, I'm sure I know your name, the lady, Jane. Yeah, Jane. In that order.
Okay.
And say who you are and who you represent.
Yeah, of course. Sam Wolf, Newnham Labour. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Earlier I presented 230 signatures to the chair. And these are people concerned by the potential privatisation of Cambridgeshire community services, particularly older people's services. Now, there are a lot of points that came out of talking to these people who signed the petition, but two of the most important ones that I'd like to bring to the CCG's attention are these. Firstly, there was an overwhelming message that people did not want their elderly relatives cared for by carers provided by a private provider. They wanted them cared for by the NHS. Secondly, and I think this is quite an important point, seeing as this probably isn't the last of these tendering procedures that's going to take place, people felt they hadn't received information about what the services were that were going out to tender, how the process worked, and most importantly of all, how the general public could feed into that process. Now, we've heard today that information will be published about the process so far, but many people would view it as too little, too late. How would the CCG, as it goes forward, like to improve its consultation with the general public and not just with designated patient groups? Thank you.
Jo Rust, Unison. Can we have a commitment that the public engagement strategy will be approved by the board, by the CCG? The present document was only considered but not approved by the shadow CCG, and it remains in draft. The CCG board needs to sign it off. I know that we've spoken about reviewing the plan, but it actually needs to be signed off, not just approved. Can we have clarity about whether there are any documents that have gone to all bidders which are not being published in January? That's in relation to the adults and older people's care. I have two other questions. In relation to the NHS and the deficit that was spoken about, somebody mentioned the Deloitte turnaround team. I'd like to know how much the Deloitte's turnaround team is costing and whether or not that's taking money from frontline services. In relation to children's services, what the document says is that joined up working is essential in relation to children's services. If that's the case, why are children's centres in Peterborough being sold off as we speak?
I'm Richard Taylor, I'm just an individual, and I'd like to ask you to consider removing the element of your constitution that imposes the draconian rules on using mechanical and electrical equipment, as you put it, to record your meetings. Here, as you heard at the start of the meeting, the chair is quite supportive of tweeting, and you all had a unanimous resolution to allow filming at this meeting. So why not just remove those elements from your constitution and follow the lead of the county council and just encourage people to film, tweet, photograph, and generally tell people what you were doing at these meetings. I think it would improve the accuracy of the reporting as well from just individuals, representatives, and the professional press who often now bring laptops to meetings and wouldn't want to do as I've done today. I've come with a sheet of loose leaf paper and a traditional pencil in case I wasn't allowed to bring anything electrical and mechanical into your meeting, which I think is a bit of a ridiculous stance to I would like to ask you about the statistics that you have presented in your papers today about ambulance response times. I'm surprised that all you get are the statistics on the percentage of times where the target is met. What we don't know from your papers and what the ambulance service themselves don't publish is when that target isn't met, how badly isn't it met. What I would like to see is a graph of the distribution so that we can see the ambulance response times when those targets aren't met. It could be a graph or it could be a table showing how many times that target was, how many times it was responsive in, say, 8, 10, 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, or even an hour, just so we can see how badly that target is getting met. Because I think that actually the reason that you've taken action against the ambulance service might not be just because they're missing their target, but because of the very long wait time for ambulance responses that we're seeing reported in the press in the area. Thank you.
Jean Simpson, member of Keep Our NHS Public and Stop the NHS Sell-Off. I attended the last Adult Health and Wellbeing Scrutiny Committee of the Council, posing to them a question that they should review the CCG review of patient and public involvement. Right. Patient and public involvement in the procurement process. As part of the response from the CCG, it was stated that once the form of the service had been formalised, and this would only be once the bidder had been chosen, then the public would be consulted about it. Now this was said to be in May. Following a 12-week consultation, this doesn't bring us to July, when the representatives of the CCG were adamant that the contract would be signed. How is it possible to sign a contract before you've had adequate patient consultation? We've had very little so far. If you're actually moving the goalpost to say it can't be done until then, at least you better do a decent consultation before you go ahead and sign the contract.
Right, I'm going to ask Andy to answer Sam's, Mr. Jameson and Jean's questions. I will answer the first one of Richard, and then I'll ask at the end Harker to answer the second one, which is the ambulance service percentage. Nick. Mike. Richard, frankly, I'd be very happy to sort of do what the NHS, this is me personally, but I think most of the CCG would agree with me, do what NHS England do and live stream our meetings so that people can just pick it up anywhere. We can't afford that, unfortunately. It's too complicated to do, but I'm quite happy to sort of take through the CCG and discuss it outside this meeting on what sort of electrical and mechanical things could or could not be at this meeting. But I agree with the principle, it should be as open and as public and as possible. Andy.
Thank you. Sam, your question, I haven't had a chance to review the petition that I signed, but we'll look at that later on. I can understand some responses that you outlined. I mean, what's important to be clear about is what the CCG is doing, and I appreciate people have said this many times before, is we are seeking the best provider to deliver the outcomes that we're developing. And you'll have heard earlier on in the meeting today that there's quite a blend of bidders coming forward. A number of those bids encompass consortia of independent sector and NHS bodies. So it's not quite a kind of binary NHS independent sector provision debate that's going on here. It's about the best provider and the best mix of providers who can deliver outcomes, who can deliver integrated care that's focused on the needs of people. Our patient story, it struck me, and Arnold made this point earlier, was partly about individual services are excellent, but they don't join up as effectively as they can, and that's at the core of this exercise in our Older People's Programme, is how do we join services up, how do we have contracts which make sure they join up. On your second question about information, we will be releasing almost all of the information that was shared with bidders. I use the word almost because there will be some parts, as Maureen outlined earlier, that we will need to redact, because not to do so would prejudice us as we went into negotiations with bidders. So where some information could be deemed to be commercially sensitive in that way, we will be redacting, but we will absolutely keep that to a minimum. Joe, turning to your questions, I think similarly, same answer around what we won't be publishing. We will be publishing all of the CCG-owned material, suitably redacted, into the public domain. What we'll clearly not be able to publish at this point is the outline submissions we've received from bidders. They remain the property of bidders at the moment, and clearly are, I think, most people agree, commercially sensitive. It would undermine the competitive process if every bidder saw each other's bids at this point. You asked a question around the Deloitte team, the turnaround team that was referred to as part of Tim's finance report. The approximate cost of that team that we've brought in to help us to get back to financial balance is about £300,000. You asked a subsidiary question of, is that money that would otherwise have gone to frontline services? The answer to that is no. We have to pay for that out of our running costs. What that means is the CCG receives a sum just over 20 million to pay for our organisation and our activities, and then we receive what's known as our programme budget, which is 870 million next year, which is where we commission services from. So it's coming from within our management costs, not from the money we use to buy NHS services. And finally, Joe, I'll have to apologise. I missed your question at the end around NHS, around Peterborough Children's Services. I wonder if you could
If joined up thinking is necessary, or joined up working is necessary in relation to children's services, and it's been mentioned several times in here, why children's centres in Peterborough are being sold off as we speak.
Okay. That's a Peterborough City Council decision. That's not a service.
And it's not joined up then, is it?
No.
That's it. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, not at this point, but one of the advantages I would hope of what we've agreed in the governing body today is at the moment, following the changes in the NHS, we have multiple different commissioners for children's services.
Doesn't that point about not being joined up, at that point,
Could I ask you
all the other issues that you're talking about? That is precisely the point why we're against privatisation of the NHS. Are you listening or are you deaf?
So what I'm trying to say, was interrupted, was the part of the point of having a joint team is so that we can have those conversations. At the moment they are separate, they're taken within the council, where it's council funding NHS through this governing body, and what we'll be able to do through the team, by having combined teams, is to look at that together. The specific question is to be one for the City Council who fund this.
But in this document it says that you're doing section 75 to hand over responsibility for commissioning the services to the local authority, and it's the local authority that are now selling them off. So there's no joined up thinking about it. And I hear what you're saying, but you're handing it over to somebody who's already selling it off. Yeah. So it's not joined up. You're not
terrible. You're not listening, are you?
Yes, we are. Can I say though that unless we have some sort of order in the meeting, we can't progress it properly, and that's all I ask for, some sort of order in the meeting. One of the things, I will answer that particular point, but one of the points that was made very, very clear is that we're not handing over the commissioning money. And we won't until we're certain that whatever commissioning money is used for joint commissioning, and we agree fundamentally with the concept of joint and joined up working, it will only be handed over if it's following the strategy of this CCG. Andy.
So,
Still sounds
Jean,
like hand
in terms
washing to me.
to your questions, I think at the heart there are several key, obviously, milestones as part of the programme. Two that's important to separate out are signing the contract and mobilising the services. And what we're working through at the moment, and Jess might wish to comment on this later, what we're working through is the formal public consultation piece, which is what you referred to, that I think was discussed at scrutiny. And we've always said that when it's clear through the proposals that we're getting from bidders and our discussion with bidders, exactly what might change the services that people would recognise, then there will be formal consultation, there will be public consultation. What we need to work through is what's the most appropriate point to do, at what point is it clear enough what the change to services that most people would recognise is likely to happen, and therefore what's the appropriate point for that consultation.
But
We're working
it
through
was
that.
actually specifically said once the bidder has been chosen. So therefore, you know, and as the representative of CCG said, only then is it a fixed framework that can be discussed with the public. How can you sign a contract? What does the contract mean if it's not fixed? How can you be consulting on whether you want to change this thing? At the same time, you're signing a legal document, carrying your money to deliver services to us. And it doesn't make sense. You need to revise the timetable to take into account these 12 weeks consultations. And only then, when you've done that, will you discuss with the preferred bidder whether they can accommodate these changes and whether you are then ready to go ahead and place a contract.
Jess is leading on the consultation.
Yes, so just to say I was at the meeting and Jean was out. So we took point of discussion around that, and I think we will be looking at the timetable consultation and bringing a plan back in February meeting, when we will be formally consulting. And on the question about the strategy, I think that might be a good point to bring a draft that would then be signed off in March. It's going to the patient reference group and some other scrutinies as well across the 4 counties. But I think I've heard that people say they want to have an opportunity to look at the strategy. So I think we'll bring that in February, but we'll also bring it into the sign-off in March. And the proposals around consultation will come in February, so that people will have an opportunity to understand that then.
Sorry, can I just say that we're going to have to finish at 4:30, so I can only take probably at most 2 more questions.
Could I just ask for a quick clarification? What is happening in March?
Yes.
So there were 2 questions, sorry. There were 2 questions. One was about sign-off for the actual communications engagement strategy. That will be formally signed off and having been considered in February at the March meeting. And we'll be doing the consultation strategy around procurement as well as the wider strategy for all our engagement.
But you will be revising the timetable, I hope.
It's constantly under review.
Yeah. Can I take the final 2 questions? We're going to take the lady in the front and then the lady in the red.
I didn't get an answer on the ambulance service.
Can I, if you want to... Oh, the ambulance service, sorry, you're absolutely right. Thank you for reminding me.
Sorry, Richard. The suggestion you put forward is a good one, because actually it's complex. The ambulance service obviously covers 18 CCGs, and we get high-level regional information. So we've been asking them to break it down to LCG level, our local commissioning group, and there's a big difference between rural response and urban responses. So I think your suggestion would be, I certainly, we'll have a look at it, we'll produce something and see if it meets with what you are looking for, because there's a lot of information there. There are 3 key parts for it, which is actually when the ambulances are initially dispatched, the time to get to the incident. And what happens at the incident is often a see and treat, or a see, treat and convey. In other words, they carry the patient to A&E. And then when they get to A&E, there's 2 measures. One is a 15-minute handover from when they arrive to the handover of the patient to the hospital, and then a 15-minute from hospital to clear back on the road. Those are the 3 key bits of that ambulance journey. We can break that down, but we can't break it down at the moment to locality level. What I think would also be useful is to share some of the numbers with you in terms of numbers of calls per day that we get in the different categories, and we can do that. So we can produce something which will try and give you a better understanding of that whole cycle of the journey. But I'm more than happy to talk to you later and see if there's a specific issue that you actually want to address, or that you think is a better way of showing the information, because we've got lots of it. What we tend to do is just show you the high-level stuff, as you say.
The lady here beside Jerry, and then the lady in
Susan Carter, patient. I sit on the patient participation committee, and I never ever hear anything about what's going on here. I only heard about it by default. I'm sick and tired of people sitting here and saying, you are consulted, you have a representative here. You don't have a representative here. I'd like to know how on earth you would get here from a patient participation group if you actually hear nothing about it in the first place. That's number one. The other is you said you're going to publish documents, but you never actually give us a date of when. So that goes on and on, month after month after month, i.e. you're now going to publish a document you refused to publish before, the ISOS perspective, but when will that be? Will it be next Christmas, next century? And finally, I actually sat in the back of an ambulance, and this is for the gentleman who's just spoken, with a very ill lady. I live in Cherry Hinton. We went the longest route possible to Addenbrooke's so they could fill in the bloody paperwork, and that's what the NHS is doing, and the Ambulance Trust, and you're overseeing that? I'm worried that people are going to be dead before we actually get any resolution or consultation in this room.
One more. The lady. This lady.
Sadie Fulton, Unison. I just want to bring sort of back to what is, the real question here. We're calling this you guys keep calling it a straightforward discussion. There's been no mention of the word privatization. So the whole discussion, nobody has said privatization. That's what's happening. And there's so much value put onto patient stories. I'm going to tell you one in the space of 10 seconds. My brother 6 years ago was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Luckily, you can tell by my accent I have dual citizenship. I'm also American, but I am a UK citizen. Luckily, my brother was here at the time. He got treated through the NHS. He didn't have to pay. We called a doctor friend in the United States who said this disease costs $1 million US, and I personally will have to drop out of university, go and take 3 or 4 jobs to pay for his thing. That's what the profit motive in healthcare looks like. That's what we are facing. And it cannot be stressed enough. There is a danger of introducing the profit motive into the procurement. Has that been looked at? Have you taken into consideration the danger of having to consider dividends for shareholders in our NHS?
We've not been consulted.
We haven't been asked.
Well said.
That's all I have to say.
Yeah, Jess, can I ask you just to comment on Sylvia's questions about publications and when the documents will be published?
They'll be published in January, talked about, the commercial sensitivity. And on the issue of PPG, if I can talk to you afterwards about which PPG that is, so we can find out what's going wrong, but you're not getting information yet. Is there another question?
I think that was it. There was a follow-on question about the ambulance service, where I can't particularly. Frankly, if that's what's happening in the ambulance service and they're going the long way round, we need to know about that and take appropriate action.
Well, they are.
So,
I can assure you. I sat in the back, and the woman was crying in pain, and they went a long way from Cherry Hinton. I've lived there 40 years.
Yeah.
That way, Coldham's Lane past Sainsbury's for anybody who lives in Cambridge. They know that's not a direct route.
That should not be happening. I will ask Harper and the contract, Sarah, the contracts performance management to take that up with the appropriate organisations. Andy, would you like to answer the question on privatisation?
Well, only briefly. There's 2 points I want to make. One is it's really important to remind ourselves that these remain NHS-funded services, wherever they are not their tax-funded services. The money comes to the CCG, we enter into contracts. My second point would be, as I said earlier on, that what is at the core of the procurement is commissioning for outcomes, and the key decision that will face the CCG is who is best placed to deliver those outcomes, and those outcomes are principally better clinical care, better experience for patients, and better experience for carers. Those will be the key decision-making criteria. And the governing body decision will be based on who are we convinced, and bearing in mind my previous point that most of the bids that we have coming forward are mixtures of NHS organisation and independent sector expertise,
the key decision will be who is best placed to deliver those outcomes within the finances that the CCG has available.
It's not people who are there to make profits,
Can
that's
I
for sure.
thank you all very much for coming to the meeting, and I will inform you all this meeting.
Can I just make one comment?
I'll
just make one.
If you any extra comments, please feel free to talk to us, but we do have another meeting this month. Thank you.
What would Clement Attlee think?
My objection to I'm not allowed to question the minutes because I don't.
Thank you. Say it now.
I should be democratic right. Question the minutes. I'm going to go and say that.
Well, I have done it before. Yeah, they've let me go.
Oh wait, well, I'll mention that.
I think we might take lots of photos of the mates on the board. I love the fact we're discussing cuts with chandeliers hanging above us.
Steve, you don't fancy coming off with me and tucking me up?
Fairly deep cold card. I'll do it. Here's the images of your presses. Note there's no name. That was the first thing I noted about the photograph.
This is
this guy. I'm going to look him up.
This is where the swell's going to go on.
Yeah. I think they can get away with it here. I think myself, it's a matter of keeping on building up the public and making it more publicly aware, getting out to people and getting out there, you know, because it gets to, hopefully it'll get to the point where private employees will think,
yeah, it gets to the point where the private, scare off the privateers.
to a certain extent, what I'm trying to it was going to be about science about when are they going to do this again.
It is what the obelisk. We're surrounded by symbols.
No, well, what we'll do is we'll put all this in writing.
Don't forget about passport.
We're not well, it's interesting.
No, it's too late, but it ain't. It's never too late.
It's never too late. Wow.
Same position as last week and every week.
Yes, I know. It is quite well, there's so much, so I point out the fact that they're taking away. Yes, the council moved away from social care. I mean, they disaggregated it right from the
I meant to say that at the beginning of the when you use it, could you? Oh, really?
And they hear what they want. It's selective hearing. That's what it is.
You can have the next few minutes. You can get a t-shirt off you. I just want to make a comment after she spoke.
Yeah,
oh, right. Yeah, I can see that. No, so I need to ask her a question. I just need to make my point. I'll be about 3 minutes. I need to make a point. I'll get that time. Keep me going now. Right, I don't know what size I'm large or extra large.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah, good on. Okay, yeah. We actually did well. We've got 45 minutes of questions in here. No, that's good. We're not doing much good. Thank you very much. If it doesn't fit me, I'll get back to you. Give me two.
They cut you off.
Yeah,